Hello, and welcome to Software Huddle. I'm here with my co-host, Alex Debris. Alex, how are you?
Sean, I'm doing well. Great to be here. Good to get together, do a banter episode. Excited to have Vino here as well.
Yeah, it's been a while since we've actually sort of chatted live, just asynchronous Slack messages to coordinate things. Yeah, and there's I'm kind of running on fumes a little bit today after a week of our sales kickoff and the prior week running a couple of events. So I'm depending on you and our guest to bring the energy. And actually, our guest Vino was at one of the events that I helped host about a week and a half ago at the Snowflake office. So we should probably go ahead and bring her in. And we our last time we did this was with Merritt Bear, and I think that was it was great to have a new energy, I guess, to these. That's not just us talking to each other. So we're bringing it back. We're bringing another guest in, and Vino's actually been on the podcast before. So welcome back, Vino.
Hey, Sean, excited to be here. And I guess today is the day we're going to banter about all things software. How? I don't know. What are we going to talk about today? What is the banter episode like?
Well, mostly we kind of update ourselves on our lives and then get into some of the hot news and some of our hot takes and impressions and so forth. But maybe you introduced yourself on a prior episode, but maybe so we don't need to go through formal introduction, but we could start perhaps with what do you kind of like currently focused on at Snowflake? What are some of the sort of projects that you have going on there?
Well, currently, I work as a developer advocate at Snowflake, primarily focused on the data engineering workloads and a bit of LLM stuff. But currently, though, I'm working on a cool demo for the Kafka Summit London next month. And it's about, a voice to text screaming pipeline that uses Snowpipe streaming and dynamic tables and more. It's just been trying my hands at it, getting things to work. It's been all that this week for me.
Will this be a live demo, like on stage?
Oh my God, it will be, which is what kind of scares me because usually live demos go pretty okay. But this one is like, I really plan to make the audience talk about something and use that as a voice input for my demo because otherwise it makes no point. But it's also like, yeah, I think I like problems at this point in my life. And I'm like, God, let's do this.
Yeah, that feels fraught with. It could be high highs, low lows, depending on how that goes. But you can always have a video backup. I've failed a few times with the live demo. Sometimes for my own reasons, it's been my fault, but other times it's been actually some sort of like AV setup mishap that actually happened to me last September when I was in Croatia. Like basically my mouse was like uncontrollable. I don't know what was going on. I think something else was connected to my computer, and I essentially couldn't do the live demo.
How do you handle that? Like, do you just skip the demo part and go in and end early, or do you just just talk for an extra like 10 minutes in there that you weren't going to, or how do you handle that?
Ideally, I have a backup where, maybe I have some, depending on what the demo is, I have like still images that I can go through, or I have a video backup that I can play or something like that. That's the smart thing. In Croatia, I didn't really have a backup. So I just was like, imagine that this thing is happening, and the only thing you can do is, make a joke about it or, try to describe what it is. But I feel like most people have empathy for those situations because they've also been in those situations or could imagine themselves in it. And I think as long as you don't like get too embarrassed about it and make a big deal, you can make it work essentially. And it might even feel more authentic and create more of a bond. It's like you're trauma bonding with these people.
Yep. I have a related question, like on this note. I used to do some like DevRel, dev advocacy type stuff. You two are both sort of DevRel or DevRel adjacent in marketing right now. How has that, and I hear about people saying, hey, the industry has changed, especially since COVID with travel stuff, although now travel is starting to pick back up more. I guess, like, how have you seen it change over the last couple of years? Has it changed in terms of travel or tactics or just different things that you're focusing on?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm talking about like my experience per se, I think forget about, the industry and the market and everything else. Compared to when I started out in DevRel to comparing it to today, I personally would prefer to create an online content that can kind of be there on the internet forever and give me more ROI in terms of how many eyes I get on the content and how many people get their hands on it, versus actually, like take a 5 hour long flight or even sometimes 10 hour long flight to just go deliver half an hour talk and then come back. And it's just, personally hard for me to justify the travel, although it might have been exciting initial years of, coming out of COVID. Everybody was excited about traveling. Let's go to this conference and that. But I feel like people are getting kind of done with that and focus more on the online content creation at this point. At least me, if I'm speaking for myself. What do you think, Sean? What are you up to?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit on what your focus is and what you're trying to accomplish. Because ideally, the things that you're putting like effort into, especially if it's going to be like expensive, where you're paying for travel and hotels and all these kinds of things, then you want it to be like that sort of activity aligned with whatever the business initiative is. And I think where like DevRel functions or practitioners sometimes can like get themselves into a bad position with a company is when there's like a misalignment essentially of the activities they're doing or even the activities they like doing and what the business sort of objectives are. So if you can show essentially a connection between the things that you're putting effort into and you're creating, and that's moving the needle for the business, then I think it can be justified. So it probably depends a little bit on what the business is accomplishing and stuff like that. For me, I travel a fair amount, but it's not all necessarily DevRel related. Since I lead marketing at Skyflow, I oversee a lot of other things like our industry sponsorship events and our dinner programs and stuff. So sometimes I'm there as executive representation of the company, or I might be there to just make sure things are like going okay. So I have sort of responsibilities outside of just like being there as a speaker, connecting with people.
Yeah, it's like a very high touch thing where you're getting a nice relationship with someone that is a heavy user, or will become a heavy user or something like that. How do you mentioned a little bit about like measurement type stuff? How do you think about that with like pure conference talks types things? Are there things you look for there?
Go ahead, Vino.
Yeah. Okay. I was going to say, personally, for me, the only way of measuring the effectiveness of a conference talk is based on the kind of questions that I get. So I used to work for a, Series A startup. We were trying to get a product market fit and everything. And at that point, our goal was to go to these data conferences and then literally shout from the top of the mountain that, a product like this exists, you should check it out. And, it was a whole different story. But, Snowflake is a whole different deal though. But in that case, for me, I go in with a specific developer messaging in mind. And at the end of the talk, depending on the kind of questions I get, I'm like, oh my gosh, so this actually resonates with these developers based on those questions, right? Like some people do tend to have vanity metrics. So, how many people turn up at your talk or like how big is the conference and all of that. But for me, especially for that specific, situation, small startup, figuring out our messaging and PMF, it was mostly the kind of questions and understanding the developer messaging that was very successful or like a fruitful metric for us, right? But I can't say the same thing to Snowflake for sure.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Sean, but like that kind of reminds me to, like, I remember when I was doing dev advocacy, similar stuff, I would hang out like on Slack channels or forums and stuff like that. And it's like, you're helping a small number of people there, but you're also getting a good feedback loop of like, where are people running into problems or like what other things are they using and how does it work or not work with our thing? So yeah, that's a good point. Like drives that whole like cycle there.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of a combination of both qualitative and quantitative metrics that you can look at. You can generate what's known as a trip report, which brings in some of these things of like, how many people were at the talk, what kind of questions did you get, what were things that you learned. I've seen people do things of like, I don't know, like business cards collected and stuff. A lot of these things are just like, I don't know, like a superficial metric that you can give to somebody. But I think if you're a smaller organization, ideally there's less focus on like proving the value and more of like a sort of natural understanding that there is value, because it's usually like if you're a smaller organization and the advantage there is like everybody has an opportunity to have like company level impact. And it's usually fairly transparent if you are. But if you're not, it's also transparent, which is, might be problematic depending on your position. In a bigger company, like a Google or Snowflake, like Vino's experience now or my past experience, you kind of have to put a lot more legwork into like, here's the metrics, here's, and you can also try to do correlations. Like I used to run events and then I would essentially, especially if it was like a new market that we were in, I'd look at the activity in that market post the event. So it's not necessarily that I can say definitively that activity led to people using the product more or making more API calls, but I could essentially tell a story that showed some sort of influence. And a lot of times, I think DevRel activities, also product marketing sometimes falls under this lens, is like how are you influencing behaviors, or maybe if you're a sales organization led organizations, like how are you influencing pipeline in some meaningful way? So a lot of times it becomes more of this like correlation metric or showing that someone touched something that you had your hands on or contributed to.
Yep. Yeah.
Awesome. Should we get into some news?
Yeah, let's do it. I will lead this off. And what else can we talk about besides AI, right? Like, just it feels like every week there's sort of new stuff going on. And I think this week was particularly interesting, right? So we had a few releases. The big one being OpenAI releases Sora. I don't know if I'm saying that right, Sora, but it's basically like a text to video generation type thing. So we've seen text to text, we've seen text to image, with DALL-E and things like that. But now actually creating 30-second, minute-long videos from text looks super sharp. Not open to everyone yet, but they're at least like starting to show what's possible and things like that. And I don't know, what do y'all think about that?
Well, I guess the timing of it is super impressive because only a couple of days ago, if you remember, Jan LeCun was talking about how difficult it is to, predict the next frame. And like video generation is one of the biggest problems we've not solved. And then 2 days later, OpenAI drops Sora. And I'm like, we can do 1 minute long videos. And everybody's like, well, who's going to tell Jan now?
Yeah, they should have given him a heads up not to embarrass him like that, right?
How many startups just got like killed overnight because they were working on this problem?
Yeah.
It's going wild. I remember the dev day happening, and then literally just right after the dev day event, I go into Reddit and everybody's like, oh my God, this company, like 6 months of our effort has gone into like nothing because of announcements. I'm sure there's going to be a similar effect for Sora as well.
Yeah, I think you got to be pretty careful if you're making some kind of wrapper around OpenAI's APIs right now and not necessarily doing something that's like, truly like a secret sauce or something like that, because they keep coming out with these different announcements. I mean, it looks really impressive. The funny thing is, like a week ago, actually leading up to our SKO, is putting together some slide, and I wanted to have like an animated GIF on it. And I actually tried to use like a free LLM product to create like an animated GIF. And it was terrible. and then literally like a few days later, they come out with this like super impressive, at least like in the demos and stuff like that, super impressive looking video. It's like, oh wow, like this is like completely blows away the thing that I was trying to do.
Yep. Yeah. It was cool too. Also that they released like, some really good, amazing videos. And then also like, well, it's not always great. Like here are some bad videos, right? And it was like a guy walking backwards on a treadmill or like trying to dig a plastic chair out of the sand, and it like sort of morphed into.
Oh, there's got to be so many like terrifying videos that they created. It's just like some of the like images that people make with like DALL-E and stuff like that, where it's just like I don't know, like a clown face on a baby or something. Like it's like terrifying. I do like, and I'm not surprised that it's not in the public. Like I think as impressive as this is, and potentially like the types of like cool things that you could do with it, I also think there's like a huge risk involved with how you could abuse it, which is same with any of the like kind of text to voice stuff where you can simulate people's voices. Like we talked about the retool hack a few times ago where they were using deep fake audio through AI. Like there's a lot of kind of scary scenarios with this as well.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. I'll be curious to see, because like one thing, like I do worry about that as well, but also, like if you see an image now, you can sort of tell if it was generated by DALL-E. They got the same kind of vibes, or around like what that is. And I wonder if that's sort of going to be the same with these videos, or if they'll, if they're going to just keep getting better to the point where it's going to be like really hard to distinguish that sort of thing.
No, I think it's getting really, really hard. Like when I was going over the, Sora videos that they released, like that's literally all I had in mind, right? I was just like, you know what? I'm really going to like pay attention to every single detail in the video to see if I'm able to tell it apart, that it is like originally recorded or is the AI generated one. It's insanely crazy how hard it is to tell. Even if, that it's AI generated. They say it is AI generated. And I'm like, I'm not able to just not even a minute of details, except for the wrong videos that they shared. Of course, they were evident. But this one's, it's going to make it extremely hard. I don't know.
The big thing I would say is like, there's not a lot of like conversation or interaction or even like depth of sort of emotion type thing. Like there's a woman, like, I think she's like making a cake or something like that. And she's just like kind of smiling and looking around, but it's like the same smile, just kind of like looking around vaguely. And it's like, once it goes on for like 5 or 6 seconds, you're like, like no human would have acted like this, and so like it's got to be like really short clips, or they got to figure out a way to, I don't know, get some like communication, interaction between people, things like that. But it is pretty wild.
Yeah, I mean, even if you take the sort of simpler use case of like text generation, a lot of times when you put like a prompt into something like ChatGPT and it comes back with something that's written, like it makes sense in terms of like you can read it, but it might be worded and phrased a lot of times in a way where like no human would really write it that way. And there's also, I feel like, certain words that get used like almost too often, at least in my experiences with ChatGPT, where it's like they're like signals that ChatGPT like generates, and it takes like some massaging to kind of like get the thing that you want, and you might even need to edit it beyond what it's giving you. But this is like taking something that's like I feel like a much harder problem of like video generation. So there's going to be, I think, a while before you get something that could be like, you're generating essentially like a Hollywood level Marvel video, movie or something like that with it. I think we're a little ways from there.
Yep. Or we can like just strap in and, be like, I want to watch a 1 hour video about this. And it just like generates the whole thing for you. Like this is not going to happen for a while yet.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. But I mean, switching gears a little bit in terms like staying on AI, but also like, I think this was also, yesterday, Thursday, February 15th, Google talks about some new models that they have. So they talked about some Gemini Ultra 1.0 or Pro 1.0. I can't remember exactly, but they released a new model this week and also are holding back some things, with the big thing being here, much larger token context windows. Like we're talking, 128,000 tokens that they're making available for regular people. They also have like 1 million token context window that they're making available for, select partners and things like that. They said they've tested up to 10 million tokens, that's interesting on one sense. And like, Anthropic has some really large token windows, but I feel like they're not super useful. Like if you put a bunch of stuff in it, it's actually not that good at finding it. But then you will have these demos of like, I think they fed like a 45-minute silent video into it and then said, hey, tell me when this specific thing happens. And it was like it was pretty niche. It was very like specific. And they're like, oh yeah, it takes a little while to do it. It took like a minute, but then it's like at 12:01, this is when it happens. And, it pulls this card out and this is what it says on it. And I was like, wow, like Jeff Dean was showing like some recall on like these enormous context windows and showing it to be really good, which is, that'd be a game changer in a lot of ways as well.
Interesting. But I feel like before we even talk about the capabilities of the model, Sean, what is up with the naming of these products? I'm like, I don't know what's going on.
Well, as somebody who worked on RCS business messaging, business messages, verified calls, verified SMS, like my only experience really working on these products at Google is like whatever the worst possible name choice is, they're going to go with it. It's like, it's so hard to track. Like even our group at Google was, I can't even remember what it stood for, but like the sort of org was, the initials was ABC, which is also the initials for Apple Business Chat, which was like a direct competitor to us. Like it's like what decision making led to that decision? And it's just like, it doesn't make, I don't know. I have no answer for you is what I'm saying.
I was like, there was Bard. It was like, fine. And then they came up with Gemini family of models. And I was like, all right, not too hard. Can keep up with this. And then there is Pro and there is Ultra, there's Advanced and there's 1.0 and there's 1.5. I'm like, oh my God, just stop it already. Like, why? What is this?
Yep. Well, like, yeah, what is going on there? Like, is it not spending enough time on it, or is it spending too much time and just like workshopping it to death to where it's like the least, I don't know, maybe least offensive or just most generic or goofy thing out there?
I mean, it could be that, when you get a big company, a lot of these things end up being sort of decisions by committee, and it's a lot less like Google doesn't run like a company like Apple, where you kind of have this person at the leadership level that's like really steering the ship. I think Google is a lot more like a loosely aligned federation of planets or ships that are kind of roughly going in the same direction. So I think that's like part of it. There's not necessarily like one visionary that's kind of like pushing these things forward. So you get a lot of like fragmentation. And I also think that's why you end up with sometimes like competing products within the same organization as well, because these groups are kind of operating a lot of times like independently. And, maybe there's also some bias with just it's very, engineering focused organization. So I don't know. There's like they talk about like the two problems, and the two hardest problems in engineering is cache invalidation, naming things in an off by one errors. So naming things is one of those problems, and if you have engineers naming all these things, well, this is what you get.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Speaking of that joke, I saw Fly.io this week. This is total tangent here, but Fly.io like launched their own sort of storage, like S3 storage, and they were saying the three hardest problems in computer science are, cache invalidation, naming things, and trying to serve files better than Amazon, right? Because like Amazon's got S3, it's pretty cheap, it's reliable, but like
it's got like 12 nines of reliability or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, but they're going after it. They're a cheaper thing. Yeah. Anyway, so total tangent there, but yeah, I think that Gemini is like interesting. They're saying like it can. I think with that 128,000 context window there, you're talking like 30,000 lines of code. Like that's a pretty decent sized code base where it can understand that pretty well. I think it'll be interesting for just being a coding assistant where I found these models most helpful, like how much that's going to improve over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think the bigger context window opens up new types of applications, possibilities than that you weren't able to really do before, especially when you're talking like multimodality. Like you talked about this like silent film, like suddenly you can feed in like large audio files, large video files, and do really like impressive things that historically probably required a person to go and like look through. You think of like surveillance tapes and people trying to find some incidents that happened on multiple surveillance tapes. Like that's just like people looking at, going through those videos, and fast forward, like to suddenly be able to have an AI assistant to do that is pretty powerful.
Wow. Yeah, that's a great use case. I didn't thought of that.
Yeah, I think it's also, I guess, Gemini Advanced now is a mixture of experts model and not necessarily just that one thing, right? So it's going to be super useful to see the variety of applications it can suddenly power, and also, of course, because of the context windows. But I guess multimodality is probably going to be the word of the year. Forget about Gen AI or LLMs.
Yeah. Can you explain mixture of experts for me real quick? Like I hear it talked about a lot, and people like assuming that's what's happening with GPT-4, but like, yeah, what's going on there?
Okay. So I guess mixture of experts, like, as it says, is you have, instead of just having one model under the hood, you have multiple models that can solve, or that were fine-tuned for like different types of problem solving. And then they kind of like pool together, or say some sort of voting is there in the output generation stage that kind of, decides what output actually gets passed on to the user, really. So it's, if you think about it, when you go from one chat GPT to another, to come up with one powerful model that is so much bigger and powerful than ChatGPT is going to be like super hard. But then if you can it's using the power of networks, really putting together multiple networks, which is smarter to get to the higher level of accuracy much faster than just training that one model and fine tuning it all the way.
Yeah, and some models outperform others on certain types of tasks. So depending on the use case, you might want a different model or different measurement approach. And then essentially, if you can bring these things together, then you can sort of get the best of all possibilities.
And are we talking like, in terms of number of models, like how many are under the hood, like 4 or 10, or is it like 100, or is it like 1,000,000? Like how many models are, or is that just sort of unclear? What's going on there?
I don't think we will know that. It could be from a few tens to even be few hundreds. I don't think I have an idea. I've not gone over the paper. But the thing is, it's not a new idea per se, right? It's even in the classical machine learning models, we always had the concepts of, stacking and bagging, which is literally what you do, right? You either cascade the models, like feed output of one model to another, where you have a more coarser classification model followed by a more fine-tuned classification model, which is more of a stacking, like cascading effect, or you have multiple models pulled together to solve the problem. It's just going back to the foundations and kind of applying that on top of our existing LLM models.
Yeah, we do this for entity detection, for like basically PII detection within like text or audio. And there's lots of different approaches, and it can be a hard problem at scale. But if you combine multiple approaches, you can get like really, really high accuracy on it.
Okay, interesting. Nice. What about you two individually? How are you using AI day to day? Like, is it a big part of your workflow? Is it like, something you reach for once in a while, but not all the time? What does that look like?
I think for me, it's definitely a big part of my workflow, but specifically when it comes to text generation, right? So for blogging, it's easy for me to kind of get started. That there's no starting barrier or like a writer's block essentially, because I have just an outline, and then it helps me work off of that, and it's like super convenient. And also, currently, I'm enrolled in an executive MBA program where there's like tons and tons of case studies to be written, where all you need to do is just, take notes and like put together an outline, and then the stories are made beautifully with, ChatGPT. So it's been very helpful for me. And on the other end, also, right, when it comes to, I'm almost now starting to use these LLM models as search engines, like, me going to actually search for documentation and like snippets and code templates have come down drastically with these, applications as well. So like very much easily 75%, 80% of my days, like going to these models and working with them.
Yeah. When you're doing the writing part, are you writing in like VS Code, like Markdown and using Copilot, or are you going to ChatGPT directly, or like what's your workflow to where it's helping you generate that sort of stuff?
Okay, so when I'm writing the actual text stuff, it's just directly going to ChatGPT and writing through them, because it's kind of easy to work off my Google Doc versus the ChatGPT interface. But then it's also interesting. One thing that I have noticed now, because I use a lot of ChatGPT. Now you give me a text, and I will be able to differentiate, saying, "Oh, this is clearly written by ChatGPT." Like I can tell you, like a standard, paragraph structure, like fixed number of sentences in every paragraph, and every sentence has like exact same number of word lengths. It's like it's too perfect to be written by like someone whose second language is English, right? I'm not a native English speaker, so it's like it's super easy to point out. Maybe for a native speaker, you might be able to write as good in English as ChatGPT, so it's probably hard. But for me, I'm like, oh my god, like it's the more you work with it, like you're actually able to see through it like super easily, which I hope, we're able to do it for the other models though.
Yeah, for me, similar. I use it a lot for sort of either like getting started or enhancing things that I'm working on, or even condensing. Like sometimes if you're putting together like an abstract for a talk, I'll just start. I brain dump it, and then it's like, okay, well, I can only submit 100 words, and then it can be sort of your brainstorming buddy for like trimming it down and editing it. And I use it for brainstorming. I use it for like stuff with my kids, like ideas for show and tell. You can. It's really like my sort of assistant in a lot of ways for both sort of work related things and then also for like parenting. But I do use Google a lot less these days than ChatGPT, because there's certain types of things that are just like way like the difference is if you need kind of like you're looking for an answer, like a definitive answer versus a collection of things, then ChatGPT is going to be probably a better resource, as long as it also doesn't have to be like real time, like in terms of up to date to now. Like I remember I was on a road trip with my wife, and we were talking about some mutual friend who was going through like a divorce, and they'd been married for 10 years. And my wife asked me about like, oh, wonder what like the alimony rules are or something like that. And I said that I thought California had like it like depends on your income and all this sort of stuff. And then I started trying to look it up on Google. And of course you get back like an article, and I'm trying to dig through. So I was like, screw this. I'm just going to go. And then I go and ask ChatGPT that like specific thing. And it can actually, it's like, we're not a lawyer, but they'll give you like a specific, the specifics of what you're looking for, rather than having to like comb through this stuff and kind of parse it yourself.
Yeah. That's interesting. I came across something recently. I can't remember if it was like diet or injury or advice or like tax advice, something. And it like was like, it wouldn't give it to me. It was like, I'm not an expert in this area. You should consult someone else. And I was like, come on, just tell me the details. I'll still like check it or something. I just want to know. Yeah.
I get that a lot with I played around with Bard or Gemini or whatever it's called now, and I get it a lot on there where it'll be like, I'm not trained to do this and stuff. I'm like, really? Come on. Like, I'm just, asking for, give me 10 jokes about like robots, like, give me something here.
You read the entire internet. What do you mean you're not trained on this?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you said you do some like blank page writing or like some writing. Is that in ChatGPT, or is that like more integrated with some tool that you have, Sean?
It's ChatGPT, or we actually developed our own internal product called VerbaGPT too. That's trained on our own like documentation and stuff. I'm actually demoing it on at a Snowflake event next week. But it's so then and it's templatized too, so I can say like I want like a blog post or a press release or a piece of documentation based around this idea, and it'll create it in the style of Skyflow, adhering to our brand and language and tone guidelines and so forth. So it's basically like a more tailored LLM specifically for our company.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah. One thing I love to use it for is like sometimes I'll be doing some writing and I'll do a lot of like writing on data modeling or something like that, right? And I need an example. I'm like, you might do it this way, for example, in this situation. And I can never think of an example, or I use like the same 3 examples. But then going to ChatGPT, I'm like, hey, I need an example of an application that does this. It updates a lot, but it doesn't do this or something like that. Give me 10 examples. And it's just like so good at just, brainstorming, like you're saying. I love that.
I've been using it for like random data generation too. Like I was working on like some Snowflake demo, and I needed a bunch of like JSON records that represented like account data. And I started doing this like manually, but after like 3 or 4, you're like, okay, that's all the fake names I can think of and stuff. And then I was like, take this structure and generate 25 of these. And it just like dumps. It's awesome for that kind of stuff. You need to generate like synthetic data. And I also use it now for if I need to convert like the title of something to like kebab casing or snake case, I just go like convert this to kebab and snake case, and it spits it out for me. So
Yep, absolutely. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think the synthetic data use case is super interesting for me because that's like been forever challenge for any demo that you're like putting together. So this is like, okay, I'm going to use it for a lot more than I already do now.
Yep. Yeah. It's really great at that. Okay. What about, so we're talking about how we've seen it now. What about, how do you think it's going to change development in 5 years? Like, are we mostly still going to be hacking out a lot of our code or doing a lot of writing ourselves? Or is it going to be ChatGPT is going to do the vast majority of it, and we'll just do like higher level sort of maybe structuring or planning, or like, how do you sort of see that? Or like, does it change? I've seen some people speculate like, hey, we're not going to be needing typed languages anymore because like, ChatGPT isn't going to make those types of errors. We're a little ways off, but like imagine something like that. So I don't know. What do you think about some of those?
Okay. If you remember DALL-E and how ChatGPT and DALL-E work together, like whatever prompt you give to DALL-E directly, there is a ChatGPT in between which takes your prompts and writes a detailed, a lot more with a lot more explanation and everything, and then feeds it to DALL-E to improve the quality of the image it generates, right? And for me, the first thing that occurred to me when I read about it was, oh my God, so I can kind of do the same thing with ChatGPT on ChatGPT, right? So instead of me having to write a prompt, we can literally just have a template or even a YAML file or whatever that is, where I just given a certain parameters, say like what Sean and his team had worked on, right? I just say press release and then give ABC keywords and then just take this, you create a prompt and then you feed the prompt to yourself and then give me a lot more detail, because the minute we start working with natural language, it purely is like super highly variable, right? You write a prompt, it's going to be different. I write a prompt, it's going to be like way different. I feel like that's going to cut down on the efficiency of the model itself if you're not writing a good prompt. But why don't you let the one thing that is super great at generating text, write the prompt itself, where all you need to do is just give it a bunch of keywords. So that's will be very interesting, but I'm yet to see anything that uses something like that, though.
Yeah, I think it's hard to predict like where we'll be in 5 years, partly because like things are moving and changing so quickly. But I also think that a lot of times like the last like 20% of like getting there is like the hard part. Like it takes forever. Like if you look at like autonomous vehicles, lots of people thought we'd have autonomous vehicles widely in circulation by now, but it's a little bit different because the consequences of mistakes is very, very high in terms of like human life and stuff like that. Consequences of a bug in software maybe is not as vital depending on what the software system is. But I do think that it could be that last 10 or 20% to really get it like human level is very, very difficult to nail. The other thing, at least right now, that is a constraint is like you can certainly use it, a super high value tool. Like I think like 80% of engineers are now relying on some sort of like Copilot assistant. That's super valuable. But the doing sort of like large scale stuff is really still like a really big challenge. Like even when I talked to like Lee Robertson from Vercel, and their V0 launch, as impressive as that is, the more sort of limited the scope of the thing that you ask it to build, the better the generation, because it's kind of hard to build like, hey, build me, Amazon.com e-commerce site. Like that's just like going to be really, really difficult to actually build something valuable there. But if you're like, create a checkout form with this button style, like that's a little bit more of a limited scope problem. So I think there's definitely some scoping stuff, but I do think it changes a little bit in terms of engineering's day to day. But so things are, I think, moving towards a place where you're working at a higher level of abstraction probably earlier in your career.
Yeah. Do you think we'll have more or fewer people, like let's say in 5 years, do you think we'll have more or fewer people than right now who the vast majority of their day is writing code? Which I would say, if you look back every 5 years for a long time, that number has been going up, I'm guessing, plus.
So basically, it's not necessarily that the role of engineer goes away, but are they sort of hands-on keyboard writing code day in, day out?
Yeah. Are they? Are they still? Yeah. Do you still have that many people that's their sort of main job, writing code?
I don't know. I think that's a tough question.
Yeah. Like in one sense, like I think of last February, because like we're like 15 months from ChatGPT coming out. Is that right? Roughly. It was like November, a year and a half ago. Okay. So like 3 months after that, I was like, holy smokes, no one's gonna be writing code in like a year or two. And if I look at now, it's like that's obviously not the case. But I also think I use Copilot or GPT or things like that a lot more than I would have expected, even last June, like where I was like, crazy expectations, sort of crash back down. And now I'm like, as I look, I'm just like, man, I do use it a ton, just like being helpful in the IDE or things like that. So I don't know. It's hard to know when you're sort of on the slope, like where it's going to end up. But yeah,
I think there's still a number of like really hard problems. Like I think there's a project called, I think it's Alpha Code, where they're trying to use LLMs to solve the ACM ICPC programming problems, which were competitions that I used to compete in college. And usually there's like a story component to it. And then you have to essentially, the problem is described as a story. So it's not necessarily like write a, breadth first search algorithm to solve this. It's not like that. It's like the solution is to it. And the algorithm, the problem you're trying to solve is like to figure out the mapping from the story to essentially the algorithm and so forth. And you might have to design something that new, like a dynamic programming algorithm. And like, it's not very good at that. That's a hard problem because you're sort of having to parse this story and then figure out the way to like map it to an algorithm. And maybe the training session is too small. I don't know, but like I definitely think there's a lot of problems that are still going to be difficult. So I think my guess, if I had to throw out a guess right now, do it bold, I think that there's still going to be a fair amount of like hands-on engineering going on day to day, even within 5 years.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Last question before we leave AI. So at some point during this week, I'm not sure if it's still true, but Nvidia was worth more than Amazon, was worth more than Google as a company. Does that seem right to you? That seems like a bubble. That seems bubbly.
I think it totally does.
It does? Okay, go ahead.
I mean, come on. Look at what we've been talking about the last almost year and a half. Right? I'm like, it's about time. Let's just get it on board. But it's kind of also scary. I'm like, is it just Nvidia really at this point? Is there no one else who can take advantage of what's going on? But it's good for them, I guess. But totally not surprised. But I'm also excited about what Sam is up to with 7 trillion, trying to come up with his own compute and GPUs and whatnot. So Nvidia probably has some competition coming up, but way too early to say anything about it, I guess.
Yeah, I would say it's probably justified, but maybe a little inflated in terms of value because of all the hype. And then also because there's such a resource constraint right now on GPUs and they kind of, own the market there. So I guess like, I don't know that it's sustainable is sort of what I'm thinking. But the thing is like a lot of these companies that are also high valued in the market depend on Nvidia. So like their growth essentially leads to more growth for Nvidia at this moment. So I don't know if it's long-term maintainable, but like I think it's justified in a lot of ways just because that's what everybody's doing essentially.
Yeah. It's surprising me. I mean, Google just has like such a sweet business model, right? And then Amazon just like has so much built out, both in terms of like the retail warehouses and logistics network and all that stuff, but then also cloud and the margins there and data centers. Like, man, that seems wild to me for Nvidia to be worth more than them. But
Yeah,
I think the big thing is, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say in terms of Google, I think because the majority of their revenue comes from ads, the multiple on that is lower than the multiple on other types of products. So you could make an argument that Google is undervalued. But at the same time, like we've been talking about, we're using Google a lot less these days. So their business is potentially under a threat as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, let's switch gears into another behemoth, Apple Vision Pro. Do either of you have one? Do you want one? What's the word on Vision Pro?
Well, I don't have one. I don't think I will want to have one, at least not yet. Looking at how big and clunky it looks with all the wires, like going around, like, sorry, keep it, it's fine. I'll probably come check back in a couple months later or maybe a couple years later when you have a better, lighter, sleeker one. On the other hand, I've been excited to check out the Meta Ray-Bans. So maybe like something. No, I don't, but that's something of interest to me, and I would definitely like put my money on it if I have to, because it's a lot more, I don't know, convenient and like it's more like a consumer product than the Apple Vision Pro for me. I don't know. It's probably targeted at very niche audience, at least at this point. I don't think they've figured out who's going to be for. And also, it's the first version. Like, as a Linux developer, we wait for the stable versions. We never do the latest releases. So it's fine.
I've never been really like an early adopter with, especially like hardware technology. I was like super late to like just even like a flip phone, and then I was really late to smartphones as well. So I'm definitely not a like D1 adopter, and I'm sure like a lot of Apple products, it'll get better as they develop these different versions. Like the first like smartwatch was terrible. I think that the first iPhone didn't even have like copy and paste and lots of other different functionalities. It was barely a phone essentially. So, but it's hard to argue with the success. I mean, it's kind of like funny. Like Apple basically has this reputation that like the V1's not going to be great, but people still buy it because it's essentially Apple and they do marketing and product innovation really well, and it has a loyal base. But I was also thinking about this is like the greatest trick the devil ever played, convincing the world to buy the V1, even though you know that it's not going to be good. Like, it's insane that it's like, I know it's going to be bad, but yeah, here's $5,000 for this device.
I mean, honestly, think about it, right? That even as a consumer, I would rather put my money on a first version of a product that Apple builds versus something that Google builds, because I don't know, Google might gonna, like they will literally scrape the product out of the market 6 months later. So it's not worth putting the money in their basket. But with Apple, although I'm not fully, convinced of how good the product is, I kind of trust the company that, they're probably going to make it better. I'm probably going to get it upgraded to better versions. So there is some sort of the customer loyalty there that they built, and it's kind of hard to miss out on.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in terms of talking about like how bad the V1 is and things like that, I had forgotten, but I think it was Ben Thompson linked back to Steve Jobs demoing the first iPhone on stage. And you see people just going bananas that like the touchscreen worked. Like you just like hear a gasp in the audience when he's like, you just click and you just scroll through your artist or something like that. And then you pick one and people are like, you can kind of hear it. And it's like, wow, that's like amazing that's where things were. But yeah, it was all, Blackberries with the little pixelated screens and, the actual like physical keyboards on them. And it's wild to see like how big that is. Anyway, like I'm super interested in the Vision Pro, but I can't justify it. It's just like too much. I do think if they had like a really good sports tie-in, like if they had a camera that was sitting courtside at an NBA game that was like recording all that, and you could just put your headset on and watch that like you're sitting courtside and look around and see the whole arena. That would just be so amazing. Like I think I would have to get one if they did that. But
yeah, well, when we were at reInvent, Alex, we talked to I think it was NASCAR CISO, and he was talking about like I don't know, it was like I can't even, it was like a petabyte of data like for every car and every race and stuff like that because of all the cameras. But they were super interested in the idea of creating these like immersive experiences for like NASCAR fans where you could like literally be in the cockpit of a NASCAR. So and Problem like, and then I don't know, maybe they need like a special chair so you can feel like the the G-force or something. Yeah, but like, I mean, I'm not a big like NASCAR fan or anything like that, but I'm sure if you were, that would be like an incredible experience to like really get a sense for what's happening like at ground level and stuff. This would be pretty cool. Same with like a lot of sports stuff. I could see the people like completely immersive experiences change the way that people watch sports.
Yep. Yeah. Like, I'm not a NASCAR guy or something like that, or F1, like people like that, but I would be tempted to like just strap in and see that. Although I might get sick just like zooming around those corners so quickly, but that would be like really like, that's just like an insane experience that you just could not have any other way, that'd be pretty fun.
No, I think just by talking about the different use cases, like be it gaming or even the NASCAR experience, you may have just converted me. Because when I'm looking at Apple Vision Pro audios, I'm like, oh, you can get your whole screen anywhere and you can work from anywhere. I'm like, sorry, not interested. Can you just like, it's probably the marketing or the messaging they've still been working around. It hasn't been there yet. But looking at, these exciting ones, like you definitely want to be there. Think about sitting in an F1 car. Are you kidding me? Just sign me up. Take my money.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy like a week and a half ago at this dinner that we hosted that flew in from like LA, and he said his plane was delayed. And he's like, the great thing about that was I had my like Vision Pro, and I just was like chilling out, and it gave me more time to like play with it and stuff. So I think he was pretty happy with the experience. Being stuck in an airport and having this completely immersive experience to do whatever he wants.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think? Like the next, like we're talking about it being V1, being kind of beta, but like how much smaller like I think one of the things people say is like it's just so big, but like can it be sunglasses based on what they're doing, like where they're like projecting stuff onto your eyes and they got cameras facing outward, like, or is it just always going to have to be headset like, and is that going to just naturally limit what it can be?
That's a good question. I think as maybe awkward or strange as it looks better than Google Glass. So, but again, like I trust Apple's designers from like an aesthetic standpoint over the Google designers. So I'm sure, like if you look at any type of technology, I don't know, like I'm certainly not like a hardware expert by any means, but we keep like shrinking things down more and more. Like even just like if you think about smartphones I think have gotten as big as they can get in terms of physical size, but they've shrunk down the actual like CPUs or the transistors so that they're really, really powerful. So you're like, have massive storage, massive compute on this thing that you can carry around in your pocket, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, I'll be curious how they solve like the solitariness of it as well. Because like I have a wife, we have kids, and it just, aside from the price, just being like, yeah, I'm gonna go sit downstairs by myself with a headset on while you guys are all doing whatever you're thing. Like usually my wife wants to hang out at night once the kids are in bed. So it's like I don't know when I would have time to really get into it. And that seems like a hard problem to solve as well. I mean, maybe it's like multiplayer mode or something like that, but that even feels weird to be like sitting next to each other on a couch and then being on the moon watching a movie or something. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think if these, you think about like how much even like cell phones, so like smartphones have like, I think impacted the way that we interact and relate with other people, like compared to say 20 years ago. Like it's very normal to be in a social situation and someone's like, staring at their phone the whole time. So suddenly if you create these other types of environments that are very like immersive and solo activity, I'm sure there's going to be some negative effects along with that. That's a little bit different to me than, hey, I have this thing that's like my gaming device and like I go and I put an hour into it as my like entertainment or something that, that's me time. But like, I wouldn't want to be like, hey, you want to watch a movie? All right, let's sit beside each other and put on our glasses. And like, you can be just watching two different movies and you're just like in the same space. I guess it's just a little bit different. It reminds me of like Demolition Man or something like that, where they create a world where people no longer have, intercourse or anything like that. And it's like a virtual experience and stuff. So,
yeah. Oh man. Yeah. We're heading towards dystopia, right? Yeah. Speaking of bad news, maybe close it off with tech layoffs. Like what's going on? I thought we were sort of done with these, but now we've got a bunch of just like really big companies going through layoffs: Instacart, Snap, Google, Amazon, PayPal, Block. Like you are more plugged into SF and the ecosystem and all that stuff. Like, what are you hearing out there, or what's it looking like?
Well, it's interesting because honestly, at this point, I think I've kind of become numb to it. And I'm like, all right, another layoff. How many people? Which company? Move on, kind of feeling. Because I remember, I guess, right around the time ChatGPT was announced, it was November of 2022, and then Meta has announced that they're going to have layoffs for the first time in the history, and this and that. It was like quite the big deal. And one of my friends who used to work at Meta, we used to have him like at our place, like cheer him up and like have him like give him mental support and everything. Like the entire week, the all the talk and conversations we had was about, oh my god, what's going on in your team, is everybody okay? It was such a big ordeal. And then I guess as the years went on and like the more and more rounds happen, at this point it's not even a news item, right? Like when you read a news item, you at least give so much of your you put so much of your mind to it, and it's not even that anymore. It's just like, oh my god, another company, all right, whatever. And it's funny, I was just talking to another friend, and they're like, it's hilarious to even think about it. They were like, bro, they fired Sam Altman, who was the CEO of OpenAI. Who are you? Like, forget about it. But like that's a very good way to think about it. And I'm like, sure, it's just kind of like could be happening to anybody. Like it just seems to be never ending, though. That's very surprising. And I really did think that 2023 was it, and then this is going to be a relatively better year in terms of job opportunities. But now I'm like, don't even know what to hope for anymore. Like, what does it look like? It's kind of hard to say anything at this point. What do you think, Sean? You have any insider information?
so I do think that sort of the macro is getting better. Like the like economy, macroeconomics are getting better. But I think the tech sector the layoffs aren't going to stop. I think that this is something that's going to continue because one is like, if you look at like a company like Meta, for example, has had massive layoffs, like their stock's at like an all-time high. And a lot of these companies are in that situation where they made these cuts, but their stock is going up. So like there's not like a incentive essentially to not, stop cutting. Like many of them got bloated, I think, during the sort of windfall when money was easy and companies were overvalued and stuff. And now there's like a natural sort of market contraction that's happening. And these companies have to respond. Whether you're a public company, you have to respond to the market. If you're a private company, then you've taken venture capital, then you have a board to be responsible to. And really, boards are putting pressure on different companies to make sure that they're running lean and that they're being very burn conscious, and they're trying to make their dollars last longer because it's harder to raise capital too. Like before, if you raised $100 million a couple of years ago, there was a feeling that, hey, we can burn this, try to grow really quickly, but we can go raise more money if we need it. And the dynamics have shifted. So then suddenly it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to go out in 6 months and raise another $100 million round. And even if I raise money, I'm going to take a down round. So now how do I make the cash that I have preserve this war chest as long as possible? Well, then I need to start making cuts essentially. And even for some companies, I think it's not necessarily they're making like in the startup realm, they're not making cuts, but they're like sort of reshuffling the deck in some ways where it's like, well, I need to hire these people based on our current strategy or based on like it's better aligned or like our go to market or whatever it is. And I need to make room for those. But then there's like other people that are maybe less well aligned in the good market. It was great to have them, but they're not as directly impactful to what we're trying to do as a business right now. So then you kind of have to lay them off, bring in other people. So there it's like keeping headcount fixed in some capacity. So I think this is kind of like where we're at. And I think it's going to continue through this year. And, even I heard from friends of mine that are at Google that they set the expectations at the beginning of the year with everybody that these layoffs are going to continue and kind of, get used to it.
Yeah, it's a bummer to just see it every week. And I wonder what that, not only for the people directly affected, but then having to do the job search, and it's definitely tighter out there and those sorts of things for sure.
Especially, it feels weird, I think, where you see all of this stuff that's happening, like where we started with like AI, and it's like a really exciting time to be in tech. And there's all this momentum, but I guess it's kind of similar to if you look back at like the .com bust that happened, it's not like the internet went away. Like it was just like it got overvalued. People predicted, like I guess predicted what was going to happen. Like they were over optimistic about the impact it was going to have, and it just took longer to get there. And then there was this contraction that happened. And there was also in that particular case, so many people didn't really know really what was going on, so they didn't have any way of even like really valuing the opportunities. I think we're kind of in a similar place with some of the LLM stuff too. Like we don't really know how to value some of the AI technology or startups that are out there, and that's why I think if you're doing something that's like pure AI, you are able to get money easier, and you could potentially be overvalued right now because there is a lot more unknowns and it's super hot. But if you're in some other part of the market, you're unfortunately probably undervalued and underappreciated, and you kind of have to run leaner as a response.
I remember, I guess, mid last year, we were thinking, oh my God, this year is going brutal, but then this AI is gaining a lot of momentum. Probably that's going to save us from all that's going on, But it looks like end of the year and then the new year starts. I'm like, nothing is saving the market. It's just going to continue to go. And at this point, I'm kind of surprised, Sean. Like, all that you talked about market contraction, folks trying to keep their runway longer and everything. Like, didn't we kind of cut down on, didn't layoffs happen for the very same reasons last year? And then you think we will continue to do that a lot more too?
Yeah. If you look at, for example, the like B2B SaaS space, something like 90% of companies last year either lost revenue, like basically they started the year with more revenue than they ended because of people churning, or they stayed flat. So, even if you made cuts, if you were in a situation where you're flat or down, you're probably going to have to continue to make cuts because again, like you can't it's pretty hard to raise a round of capital if you didn't actually make more money over the year, like you have a negative essentially growth rate. So you need to look at how do I save my company, or you need to fold up your business, go to business, and then you're probably churning a bunch of contracts with some of these other companies. So it becomes this like flywheel and cycle where some companies are going under, and then that impacts other companies. Even if those other companies are potentially doing well, they're going to lose money or lose revenue because those contracts end.
Gotcha.
So it's not just the layoffs; it's like all these types of things are happening.
I think that closes off the topics, but I don't want to end on a low note here. Anything exciting coming up for y'all, like either this weekend or I guess you got the big talk, and you said London for Kafka Summit, is that right?
Yeah. So it's next month, but then because of the complexity of the demo, I really want to be done with the demo this week or next, and really have some peace of mind because I've been in places where I've never been able to wrap up the demo, can't get it to work, and then like tweaking it till the last minute, and it's like, I'm getting old, can't deal with so much of stress at this point. Like want to, keep things clearer now. But I'm also excited for this weekend. I guess it's a long weekend. I have my friends visiting, a bunch of hikes planned. I'm like, it's Friday already. Let's go. It's exciting. What are you up to? What's exciting?
So we were speaking of live demos. I'm doing a 5-minute live demo with Felipe Hoffman from Snowflake, one of your colleagues, next week. So that's going to be intense, to be able to pull this off in 5 minutes. And then at the first week of March, I'm going to Vancouver to speak at a conference there, the Vancouver International Privacy and Security Conference, I think it's called. And I'm doing a net new talk there. So I got a lot of work to do between now and then to actually put that together. I know what I want to talk about in my head is very clear, but actually, turning that into materials and a talk track and stuff like that's going to take some work.
Mm-hmm. Okay, quick question though. Talking about, putting together your talk track into a presentation and everything, did you have had any success with, creating slide decks with any of these AI companies?
Yeah, I haven't tried them. I talked to, or I heard of a company recently that is doing that, where they're essentially generating like a slideshow from a prompt. I haven't experimented with any of them, but I do think it's an interesting idea. I don't know how good they are though.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Just out of curiosity, I'm like,
Vino, have you tried any of them?
Not really. I've heard of Beautiful AI, and I tried it too, but I was like, nah, I make it better, so it's just not up to the mark. But I was like, would be open to try if there was anything else.
It's hard for me. I
think it's tough.
I like to have so much control over my slides. Like I don't like anyone generating my slides, even though I kind of hate generating them sometimes. I'm like, I still want them to be like my style or something,
No. Yeah, I think that's a hard one to crack, right? That's what I was saying. Like I was super curious. Even if it did a half decent job, I would have maybe like went with it. But it was just like, oh no, sorry. Like it's just like really hard to.
Yeah, I think it's really hard because people have such unique styles of presentation, and a lot of times like slides might just be an image, right? Like ideally, you don't have a lot of text on the slides, so it's more to the more important part to me is like the story that you're telling, and then you have some sort of visuals to like reinforce it or keep it compelling, or have like hit something a little bit harder to stick with the audience and stuff like that. I think where I would be interested in using something like this, and I haven't really experimented with it, is if I put together the slides, then on a slide by slide basis, be able to like feed it to an LLM and say, make this, how can I make this better? Kind of like where you can take like a title of a talk or title of a blog post or something and like generate, 10 different versions of this. And sometimes that allows you to key into an idea that maybe you hadn't thought of, or a phrasing that's better. And I think as a brainstorming buddy, that could be interesting if you could do it.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, that concludes our banter episode. Vino, thanks so much for stopping by. It's great to have you back on the show.
Always happy to, come in, talk about all things AI, data, industry, SF, and everything. It was wonderful. And thanks for having me.
Awesome. And Alex, good to see you live and in person. Well, not quite in person, I guess, but like video person.
Good to see the person. Yep. So
unless you're a Sora generated animation, I don't know.
I'm gonna break it to you here at the end here. I'm actually just a Sora demo exactly. So
all right. Well, thanks and cheers.
Cool.